Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life and the incredibly profound ideas of a man whose mind literally sparked what we call a Copernican revolution. We're talking, of course, about Immanuel Kant. Now, just as Copernicus totally upended science by proving the Earth revolves around the sun, Kant completely revolutionized our understanding of modern human rights, science, and ethics. He did this by fundamentally changing how we understand the human mind's relationship to reality itself. He didn't just add a few thoughts to philosophy. He entirely changed the axis the whole thing rotates on.
But, to really grasp his massive ideas, we first kind of have to look at the man himself. And frankly, he was quite the character. Born in 1724, Kant lived this incredibly quiet, hyper-regimented life. In fact, local legend has it that the townspeople of his native Königsberg, in what was then Prussia, literally set their watches by his afternoon walk. It was executed with absolute military-level precision. He never married, and incredibly, for a man whose thoughts basically traveled across the cosmos, he never once traveled outside of his hometown.
So there's this really profound irony to his existence. On one hand, he lived what you could call a clockwork life, waking up at 5 a.m. every single day, strictly working, walking, and staying within a few square miles. Yet, on the totally opposite hand, he possessed this boundless mind. From that tiny, rigidly controlled physical bubble, his ideas were revolutionary, they were universe-bending, and they practically reshaped the entirety of Western civilization.
Okay, so let's dive into this highly structured worldview by breaking down his specific branches of philosophy. This roadmap actually perfectly mirrors Kant's own deep love of categories. We're going to cover 1. The philosopher who never left his city. 2. The knowledge revolution. 3. Absolute ethics. 4. Freedom and beauty. And 5. Kant's legacy today. Starting right off with section 1, the philosopher who never left his city. Let's look a bit closer at his timeline. Born into a strict religious Protestant upbringing in 1724, he entered the local university in 1740. He worked incredibly quietly, actually becoming an unpaid university lecturer in 1755 and eventually passed away in 1804. But underneath all that quiet academic dedication, a massive intellectual storm was brewing. Kant later wrote that reading the skeptical philosopher David Hume famously awoke him from his, quote, dogmatic slumber. He basically realized the philosophical world of his time was completely stuck, and well, he needed to fix it.
Which brings us to section 2, the knowledge revolution. How do we actually perceive the world?
Back in the 18th century, philosophy was essentially a heavyweight fight between two camps. On one side, you had rationalists, like René Descartes, who argued you can only trust the mind and that we're born with innate ideas. On the flip side, you had empiricists, like David Hume, who argued the mind is basically a blank slate and that all knowledge comes purely from our senses and physical experience. Kant looked at this and realized both sides were partly right, but also partly wrong. They were basically arguing about two completely different things, and this realization sets the stage for Kant's grand synthesis. So here is his absolute game changer. Kant proposed that human knowledge requires both experience and the mind's built-in structure working together. He introduced this concept called the synthetic a priori. Basically, these are judgments that add new information about the world, that's the synthetic part, but are universally known to be true independent of our physical experience, that's the a priori part. Take the phrase, every event has a cause, right? We don't need to physically experience every single event in the entire universe to know they all have causes. Our minds actually require this rule before we can even process an experience in the first place. To make sense of all this, Kant created a massive, fundamental division in reality. He split it into phenomena and noumena. Think of it like being born wearing permanently tinted glasses that you can literally never take off. Everything you see, touch, and study, that's the phenomena. It's the world filtered through the specific tint of your human mind. The noumena, on the other hand, are the things in themselves. It's what the universe actually looks like without those glasses on. But Kant argued that because we can't ever take the glasses off, the noumena is ultimately completely unknowable to us. We literally project concepts like space, time, and causality onto the world just to be able to process it. And what exactly makes up the tint of those mental glasses? Well, Kant defined them as the 12 categories. Just to name a few of the big ones, you've got unity, plurality, causality, and possibility. These 12 categories are the actual structural molds of the human mind. Now you might be thinking, wait, does this mean science is fake? No way. In fact, Kant proved the exact opposite. Because all humans share these exact same mental molds, we can absolutely rely on science to uncover the universal rules of the phenomena.
We might not know the universe exactly as it truly is in the dark, but we can know with 100% certainty how it will always appear to us.
Moving on to Section 3, Absolute Ethics, Duty over Utility. Let's do a little moral stress test before we get into his specific rules. Would you lie to get out of a highly difficult, maybe even dangerous situation? What about selling one of your organs for profit? I mean, strictly economically speaking, selling a kidney makes sense, right? You get cash, someone else gets a kidney. But Kant completely challenges our basic human instincts about convenience, utility, and absolute morality.
His answer to those sticky questions relies entirely on his most famous idea, the categorical imperative. He said, act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. To put that in everyday terms, Kant is asking, would you want every single person on Earth to lie whenever it's convenient? Obviously not, because if everyone did that, the concept of truth would cease to exist, and human communication would collapse entirely. Therefore, lying is universally and absolutely wrong for you to do. No exceptions, none.
Let's contrast his super duty-bound ethics against the dominant alternative at the time, which was utilitarianism. Utilitarians say an action is good if it creates the most overall happiness or the best outcome. Kant entirely rejects this. He champions what he calls goodwill. He believed an action is only good if the intention is pure and based entirely on duty. Crucially, and this is a big one, you must treat humanity as an end in itself, never merely as a means to an end. Going back to our organ selling example, for Kant, selling your organ is deeply wrong because you are using your own human body merely as a tool. You're treating yourself as a means to get cash. For Kant, human dignity is absolute. It is never for sale, regardless of the economic benefits.
Now into Section 4, Freedom and Beauty in Kant's Philosophy. You might be listening to this and thinking that Kant's strict rules sound deeply, maybe painfully restrictive. But surprisingly, they actually pave the way for true human freedom. Consider his definition of autonomy. For Kant, freedom is not just running around doing whatever you want without restriction. He'd say that's just being a slave to your own animal impulses and desires. True autonomy is the ability to determine laws for yourself based on pure reason. Because of this, Kant argued that a just government shouldn't force people to be happy in one specific mandated way. Instead, a government exists purely to protect this universal freedom, allowing you to pursue your own path through clear laws just as long as you don't infringe on the freedom of anyone else. And his absolute love for rational structure didn't even stop at politics and morals. He applied it to art. He categorized this subjective yet strangely universal nature of beauty into 4 traits. He said true beauty is disinterested, meaning we don't just find it practically useful. It's universal, meaning we naturally expect others to agree that it's beautiful. It's without concept, meaning you can't just write a strict mathematical formula to create it. And finally, it feels necessary. He essentially proved that even our entirely subjective appreciation of a sunset or a painting actually has an underlying rational structure in our minds.
Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, Kant's legacy today.
Honestly, Kant's enduring impact across history is frankly staggering. The modern concepts of human dignity, of democratic constitutional law, and the universal human rights that we basically take for granted today, this core idea that people cannot be treated merely as tools by dictators or giant corporations, all of that is largely built straight onto his intellectual scaffolding. On top of that, he directly triggered German idealism through thinkers like Hegel, and went on to shape both major branches of modern philosophy, analytical and continental. I think the philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce captured this legacy perfectly when he said, almost everything in philosophy is a footnote to Kant. It's so true. Even his harshest critics, from the 19th century all the way up to today, still have to argue from the very platform that Kant built. He literally challenged the vocabulary and the rulebook of human thought forever.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. Knowing what you know now about the categorical imperative, this intense idea of treating every single choice as if it were to become a universal law for everyone, how will you evaluate the very next decision you make today? Whether it's a massive life choice or literally just how you treat a stranger on the street, Kant reminds us that human dignity, duty, and reason are always at stake. Thanks so much for joining me in this explainer, and keep exploring those boundless ideas.